Hi, Andrew from SACS, and welcome to video number 1 in our 11 video sequence on cognitive ability, otherwise known as personal intelligence. In this sequence, we'll be taking you through a brief history of cognitive ability, and that's what I'm doing in this video. We'll be talking about what causes cognitive ability and what it correlates with in life. And finally, we'll be talking about applying it to the workplace in the sense of measurement for either development or for recruitment purposes. But first, a brief history and the famous quote from Socrates, "I know that I'm intelligent because I know that I know nothing." So that's going back to BCE terms. It may interest you to know, or maybe you do know this, that if you go back to the Sui dynasty, AD 605 in ancient China, the imperial examinations were set up, and in fact these were set up in a competition sort of a sense. So you would go to a local competition to complete examinations, and then you would go to a regional one, and you'd end up in the Forbidden City. And if you scored well enough, then you became a mandarin. You became an official of the government. Now, they had set questions and they had norms. I mean, that's a cognitive ability test by most people's standards. In the late 1800s, Francis Galton came up with the term psychometrics and also nature versus nurture, which figures heavily in subsequent videos in this sequence. Spearman and G. The concept of G is that people have a level of general intelligence. In other words, if you measure people's components of intelligence, and I'll explain what we mean by that in just a second, but if you measure those components and average those measures, it gives you a level of general intelligence. And this proves to be a good predictor of life outcomes. People who have higher levels of general intelligence tend to have better outcomes than those that don't have such high levels of cognitive ability. Binet and Simon started the process of testing in an educational setting, and then a guy by the name of Thurstone, 50 to 70 in the 1900s, came up with the idea of multiple abilities. And Thurstone's model of multiple abilities included things like numbers, space, perceptions, verbal relations, word fluency, memory, and induction, as he called it. And in fact, if you look at the design of curricula in schools, a lot of that design comes from Thurstone's ideas that you can be number smart versus word smart. And in fact, that's pretty much how we measure cognitive ability in the workplace. What about trends? Well, if you look at the history of cognitive ability, you'll see that cognitive ability has increased over the years. So if you go back to the 1900s, you'll find that cognitive ability was significantly lower than it is today. And why? Well, fundamentally, the jobs and lifestyle of today require people to be smarter rather than physically stronger or physically faster. And so that has caused an increase in cognitive ability. Now, the mechanism of that increase is an interesting thing to discuss. Some will say that people who were smarter had the opportunity to procreate more, they advantaged more, they survived more, and that caused this creeping example of change. Or others would say it's epigenetic. In other words, it played to the strengths of people who literally changed their capability in response to environmental stimulus, like the challenges of work. But in any event, that has increased. Now, interestingly, in recent times, particularly the last 5 to 10 years, there's good evidence that it's starting to decline again. And this is called the reverse Flynn effect. The increase is called the Flynn effect. The reverse is called the reverse Flynn effect. And there's a range of thoughts as to why this has happened. But one of the most credible is that people are outsourcing their mental tasks to computers and phones and those sorts of things. So it doesn't really require the same sort of cognitive exercise. And we know, like the physical body, if you exercise your brain, it's likely to get stronger. If you do that less, then it's likely to weaken somewhat. So cognitive ability does appear, with credible databases measured in multiple different locations, to be on the decline at the moment. Now, the next video in this sequence will be to define cognitive ability. What is it in more specific terms? Click on the link near this video to join us.